Brabway, economics in Quan. Ah, Liga Brabway, economics in Quan. Sukumun Semi, economics in Quan. Ah, Liga Brabway, economics in Quan. Ah, you will make a day. Aseni, Achim Memu, Sukumun Semunti, and Amabaligo, Ubibasia University of Lego. Lea ye baby, I better. Easamu Lego Brabway, economics in Quan. Ah, Lego Brabway, economics in Quan. Sukumun Sensami, economics in Quan. Lego Brabway, economics in Quan. Miss me free no man. Me think say you be a cream na me buy. Ma betting moi. Manantia. Sika minenda faka ipo. Yeah, who I did. Economics in Quan. Legon, Abraboy, economics in Quan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Knott, Dean of NYU Steinhardt, and I am so pleased to welcome you to our conference today, Arts and Health at NYU Accra. Our event is the first in a series of conversations with NYU Global Sites, highlighting the central role of the arts in health and healing. And today's conference is part of Arts and Health at NYU, a Steinhardt-based university-wide initiative that brings together researchers and students from across the university to advance the relationship between education, research practice, and policy in the arts and health. As many of you know, NYU Steinhardt is one of the most prominent schools in the world devoted to a holistic understanding of people and human development across the lifespan. And our mission is to improve the education, health, and well-being of people and communities here in New York, where I am now, and around the world. We aspire to interconnect the arts and humanities with the social, behavioral, and biological sciences. Through statistical and scientific analysis, human narratives, visual works of art, and musical compositions and performance, we work together to improve people's lives. And to that end, we understand that solutions to problems don't come from a single source, but from the creativity that emerges when researchers, scholars, artists, and clinicians cross disciplines, continents, and time zones to work together toward a common goal. Our collaboration with higher education institutions in Ghana are creating new opportunities for research and scholarship. Just last week, in fact, Professor Toboho Moja delivered a keynote address at the first annual International Doctoral Research Conference at KNUST in Kumasi. This summer at NYU Accra, Carol Spreen of our Department of Teaching and Learning will lead a special program to help students understand the role of education in promoting healthy, socially just, thriving, and sustainable communities. And at the University of Winneba, Vice Dean Christy Patton leads an educational leadership fellowship program for women called Gifted. It's a special program that offers professional development to Ghana's public school teachers. Today, health and wellness is one of the front and center concerns of NYU Steinhardt, as it is with our partners at NYU. At NYU Steinhardt, we have an interdisciplinary strength in programs in art, music, and drama therapy that teach students how to integrate the healing arts into their practices. And research tells us that artistic therapies show great promise in reducing isolation and can help people to recover their creativity, imagine a better future, put ideas into action, and after injury or illness, feel alive again. The idea behind the Arts and Health at NYU initiative is to broaden the reach of these kinds of interventions, to create the data and empirical proof that art can be a powerful tool in physical and mental health care, and it can be used to enhance the well-being of children, families, and communities. We really have so much to learn about healing, and I know our colleagues in Accra have a lot to share with us. I want to thank all those who've had a hand in creating this program. Our event this morning is a joint effort between Arts and Health at NYU, NYU Accra, Steinhardt's Office of Global Programs, NYU's Office of Alumni Relations, the NYU Center for the Humanities, and the Steinhardt Arts and Humanities Initiative. Also, special thanks to Lisa Sasson, Associate Dean of Global Affairs and Experiential Learning. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Nisha Sajnani, co-founding director for Arts and Health at NYU. Nisha.
Thank you so much, Jack, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's my pleasure to hold this event. It's to co-host this event with all of our wonderful partners. And I also want to add a few words of thanks, certainly to all of our collaborators who you see here, but also to the co-directors of the Arts and Health at NYU, who you don't see on screen. They are from Stern, our business school, Gallatin, the interdisciplinary school, Tisch, our art school, and Langone, our medical school. And they are with us in spirit. And I would also like to extend my thanks to Raymond Plaff, who's our fearless IT leader who helped us put together this presentation. So thank you to Ray and to our colleagues at IT for your support. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you to the site director for NYU Accra, Frankie Idosian, who's going to introduce our speakers. Frankie, over to you. Frankie, I'm going to ask you to restart that because you're muted. So I'll pass it back over to you.
Can you hear me now, Doc? Wonderful. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so very much. It is a warm, balmy afternoon here in Accra, and we can see through the chat that there are people from all over the world, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to join us. Here, at this point, we are now at the meat and potatoes part of our webinar. And it is such a pleasure to have this conversation here, starting with our keynote speaker, Dr. de-Graft Aikins, who is a global professor from University College London. Everybody knows at some point in their lives that music, literature, dance, something or the other has helped you to heal from a tragic circumstance. Dr. de-Graft Aikins is someone whose research focuses on chronic illness, experiences with care, and the psychosocial, cultural, and health systems here on the continent. So we're very pleased. We're going to kick off with her. And immediately following, we will have a conversation from Kinna Likimani, who is the founder of Nsona Books, and she publishes fiction as well as textbooks here in Ghana. One of the most amazing things about her journey through literature is that she has reversed her type 2 diabetes since 2020, and she helps other people to do this, or at least arrest it or reverse it through all of the wonderful things that are available to us. And right after she's done, our very own Dr. Kodjo Senah, he has been affiliated with NYU Accra for a very long time. He's an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Ghana, and his teaching and research interests are in the area of medical sociology. Even though he has been teaching with us for so many years, I can tell you that his classes, looking at healthcare and looking at traditional systems and what we have in Ghana, always leave us with a lot to think about. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Dr. Aikins so that we can begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome and introduction, and for inviting me to be part of this really important session. I've sort of written a few notes. I'm going to sort of read from them, and hopefully Nisha can help me with the slides. So the arts serve multiple functions in Ghanaian social life. They're incorporated into significant cultural rites of passage, from the outdooring of new births, the marking of puberty to the mourning of death. Arts support political systems and religious systems and practices. The arts also function in Ghana as catalysts for social change. So for instance, scholars of indigenous arts show how folklore, folk songs, and theater in many Ghanaian communities use humor, satire, subversive critique to challenge social norms and authority, and to confront taboos and sacred institutions. The arts also lie at the heart of health, illness, and healing, as we heard from the introduction by Jack. In my presentation today, I'll focus on the role of arts in health in three parts. First, I want to provide an overview of indigenous healing arts in Ghana. I'll then turn attention to the field of arts and health in African and Ghanaian settings, drawing on what works and what doesn't work in these settings. And then finally, I want to make a case for merging these models in the development of sustainable, community-owned, arts-based interventions in Ghana, and possibly, with implications for other African contexts. I want to argue that the arts shouldn't be seen as an added feature to health communication and health behavior, but as a core feature, because the arts tap into imagination, memory, emotions, thinking, embodiment, and sociality. At the same time, it's important that we recognize the arts, like all performative and expressive forms, have limits and unintended consequences. And these dynamics have to be understood in the development of public health interventions. So that's my intro. So part one, healing arts in Africa. Across many Ghanaian communities, the arts inform everyday practices in ways that generate well-being and health at individual and social levels. In Sirigu, in the Upper East region, for instance, women of different ethnicities have painted on walls for centuries in a tradition called Bambarisi. These female muralists use mud, red rocks, tree barks, and other natural materials in their local environment, working only with the colors red, black, and white to create public art that beautifies the community, but also confers healing functions. Asante women in the middle belt of the country mold clay pots called Ebusiakruwa, the clan pot. And these pots serve ritual as well as everyday functions for the family and nuclear and extended families. In Fanti communities along the southern coast, women who supported warrior Asafo companies, and these were military groups who led battles against European slavers and colonists, belonged to singing groups called Azawa, initially formed to exhort male warriors and sometimes fight alongside them. They now perform for themselves and their broader community, singing on women's themes such as reproductive health and child loss. These users of arts in everyday life tap into what social psychologist Sandra Jovchelevich calls the creativity of the social. She defines this as the ability of individuals and groups to reconfigure the old experiences, accumulated traditions in new ways through imagination. Beyond the creativity of the social, the arts are also woven into diagnostic practices and treatment regimes of indigenous healers. So diagnosis by an Akan shrine priest or a Dagomba diviner might be accompanied by song or dance or bell ringing or throwing of cowrie shells. There might be drumming by master drummers using a specific set of drums. The healer might wear specially designed attire rich with healing symbolism. Traditional shrine architecture in many communities incorporate art and artifacts designed to prepare clients psychologically for the healing process. For example, wall reliefs, depicting animals associated with health and protection. In the communities I've mentioned, healing arts are often produced by specialist artists who have been born into families of master artists, craftsmen, and craftswomen, sometimes generations deep. To cite one example, Ghanaian art historian Kwame Amoalabi describes what goes into the reconstruction of a fancy Posoban shrine and the role of an expert artist, and I quote, next slide, please. In undertaking, next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. In undertaking these reconstructions of the Posoban, the endeavor cuts across professions and requires different sets of skills. The work is dependent on the availability of modern building materials, creative construction, and artistic dexterity. Critical to an artist's suitability for work on a Posoban is a deep knowledge of the Asafo community's origin, history, and culture, including past leaders and values. Comprehension of and training in traditional religious practice, as well as knowledge and understanding of local proverbs and folklore is also necessary. Finally, the artist is charged with linking these traditions in a modern enterprise, end quotes. So how do these healing arts operate? I'll draw on 2 case studies in Ga communities in Accra to illustrate the process. In the 1980s, African-American sociologist Leith Mullins conducted ethnographic research on mental health and healing in Labadi, Accra. She observed adults and children who sought diagnosis and treatment from shrine priests for various mental health problems, depression, anxiety, night terrors, and psychosis. She documented the way shrine priests collected social facts, next slide please, which she defined as views, grievances, feelings, attitudes held by various individuals in different structural positions in relation to a specific case at hand. She described the way artifacts, objects, and commodities were used to amplify the functions of social facts. And one diagnostic encounter involving a local healer named Atta and a young woman with psychosis called Abba. Her family was requested to bring 14 items, including, next slide, please. I'm just going to cite a few. 1 bottle of palm oil, 1 bottle of schnapps, 9 eggs, the good ones, not the ones that come from the poultry farm, 12 yards of white calico, 12 yards of dark blue calico, and so on, as you can see on the slide. And each of these had ritual significance. In Mullins's ethnographic description, prior knowledge of the social facts of Abba's case, typically gathered through family and social connections, and the use of objects, symbols, and performance were central to divination. The patient, Abba, suspended her Christian faith for the purposes of traditional spiritual healing. Abba and her mother brought the prescribed items, begin treatment. The process took 3 months and involved medication, baths, sacrifice, and special rituals. It was an unpredictable and psychologically draining journey for Abba and her family. By January of the following year, when Mullins ended the story, Abba had not received the healing she desired. Mullins described Ga medicine, chofa, as being both symbolic and physiological. Next slide, please. Sacred and mundane, visible and invisible. She observed that, as in all medical systems, much of healing is art involving the idiosyncratic. Since 2010, I've conducted research on chronic care in Gamashi, a few miles to the west of Labadi. My research team and I work with community members living with diabetes, hypertension, post-stroke conditions, and associated health problems. Like Labadi, next slide, please. Gamashi has a rich culture of healing arts. Murals, statues, sculpture, and artifacts abound, representing the complex features and functions of Chofa in private and public spaces. Traditional shrines predate and outnumber biomedical service, as you can see on the slide, Christian churches and Islamic mosques, and they're all still active, providing solutions to psychospiritual problems, marital discord, job insecurities, and so on. In 2018, we conducted an interview with a chief shrine priest and his elders. The origin story he told us about the community and its traditional religious systems took on migration history, colonial encounters, and the power of the sea. His healing methods mirrored the methods of Atta in 1970s Labadi. He gathered social facts at dawn for diagnostic and healing purposes. He blended herbs, salts, palm oil, seawater, rainwater, and other ingredients into healing baths. And he emphasized the importance of liquor in the consulting process. There are also some innovations, 30, 40 years on, expanding the brands of acceptable liquor and incorporating Florida water, a product used in Christian faith healing, in his healing baths. His fascinating and often fantastical story was also represented on a mural on his compound wall. Next slide, please. And through artifacts situated on the compound, there was a broom at the main gate, for instance, and artifacts put to use in consultation. All of us had to drink from a communal gourd when we visited. But crucially, in both cases, 1970s Labadi and present-day Gamashi, the healing environment extends beyond the private consulting space into physical communities. Both healers gather social facts from family and community members, for instance. The healing environment also exists in social imaginaries and spiritual imaginaries. The presence and actions of malevolent family and friends, as well as evil spirits and forces, are woven into the presentation of health problems and the diagnosis offered to them, to clients. And the healing environment is a communal space in constant development and evolution through dialogical interaction between healers and communities and their ever-expanding health problems. And the arts are central to this healing environment. In indigenous healing systems, arts are the core feature, valuable in and of itself, whether they come from specialist artists or through the creativity of the social. And for some healers, the artistic and creative impulse drives innovation in all its facets. Next slide, please. The healing arts, next slide. The healing arts I've described are distinct from the formal field of arts and health, or as some call it, arts in health. Developed over the last few decades through interdisciplinary studies in Europe, North America, and Australia in particular, arts and health has been defined as an approach. Next slide, please. That's fine. No. Previous slide. As an approach oriented towards the broader social determinants of health. Practice typically takes place in community settings, involves the active participation of individuals or groups rather than audiences, and is aimed at improving health and well-being in its wider sense. There's a growing body of work globally on the application of art forms to health promotion, disease prevention, policy development, illness management, and aesthetics of the healthcare environment. Next slide, please. And these art forms often tap into broader sort of frameworks within health, traditional health communication, but also tap into social psychological processes of communication, interested in what happens at the psychological level, the social level, and the structural level. In the domains of health promotion and illness management in particular, studies show how songs can educate on a variety of health conditions, how singing can improve lung health, how music reduces levels of anxiety, visual arts facilitate neurocognitive regeneration, so has import for neurological conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, how applied theatre can conscientize communities for health advocacy, and also how comedy can be an effective tool for reducing disease-related stigma, such as for mental illness and HIV/AIDS. In Europe, North America, and Australia, studies are typically well-funded, and the field is incorporated into healthcare systems and policy. A recent comprehensive review on arts and health in Africa by Christopher Bunn and colleagues offered a nuanced profile of the field on the continent. Next slide, please. The review covered 119 studies conducted in 30 countries, applying 17 art forms, including theatre, dance, storytelling, to 16 health issues. The majority of studies focused on HIV/AIDS were located in South Africa, and theatre art was a dominant art form across the cohort of interventions. And this review, showed general insights. For example, studies focused largely on health promotion, illness management, and in some cases, community health development. There was very limited evidence on studies focusing on the more structural elements of public health, such as developing health-related social policy or addressing social structural change, in particular, the structural drivers of health inequalities, for instance. And a cross-cutting observation in several countries was the cultural preference the communities had for multi-art forms. When we look at arts and health, the categorization of arts in global arts and health studies, art forms are usually distinguished. You've got visual arts or performing arts, and so on. But the authors noted that African conceptualizations of arts tended not to make many distinctions between forms, between performing arts, visual arts, design, and crafts, and so on. There's a consensus that when arts and health models developed in Western contexts are imported wholesale into non-Western contexts without cultural grounding, this comes with problems, including the imposition of methods and policies that at best do not work, and at worst can be harmful. For example, Gail Bonner observes that the more conventional model of creating art for HIV education is almost always top-down. Funding agencies like UNICEF or USAID decide on the message and hire artists to use their skills and talents to deliver the message. The voice they represent is typically the voice of the agency who hired them. There's no place for their own voices. End quote. This critique was upheld in the Bannatal review, but they also offered 3 important insights into how theories of arts-based health interventions can be built and tested in African settings. They made 3 points. First, next slide, please. Next slide, please. First, we must understand what is off the community and what is alien to it. For example, if we're developing a song-based intervention for HIV or malaria, do we use a generic song from a model study, or do we use folk or popular songs familiar to the research community? Second, we must anticipate and pay attention to unintended consequences of using the arts. For example, educating communities on serious health conditions like cancer works through comedy sketches or cartoons because it cuts through the inaccessibility of scientific concepts. But what we find is that if the content ignores community preferences for ambiguity in humor and in general communication and applies direct messaging, the interventions might not work. Thirdly, we have to build on indigenous artistic traditions in ways that are not only acceptable or competent, but also compelling and transformational. Interventions must lead to new and sustainable ways of creating health for individuals and communities. These insights are pertinent to the Ghanaian context, the context in which I work. And as part of my current project called Chronicity and Care in African Contexts, next slide please, I'm working with a team on a scoping review of arts and health in Ghana. We have a database of studies, peer-reviewed grey literature, conducted from the 1930s to present, applying a range of art forms, from drawing to dancing, to applied theatre, to using art exhibitions, to a range of conditions: malaria, mental health, COVID-19, HIV. And studies have been conducted largely at community level in urban and rural communities with adults and children in a number of regions: Greater Accra, Ashanti region, Northern region, Central region, and so on. Our preliminary analysis of 16 peer-reviewed studies, I'm not focusing on the grey literature here, offers insights similar to the reviews by Bunn and colleagues for the African setting. The majority of studies focus on health promotion, and only 4 studies involve policymakers or focus on policy implications of their studies. While all the studies pay attention to sustainability, only one concretizes this goal, with follow-up work, which opens up avenues for innovative community engagement. This is really because most of the studies tend to be pilot studies, exploratory studies, very limited funding. There's very limited opportunity to move insights forward. But specifically in terms of developing culturally situated projects, just over half of the studies address one or two aspects of Banathal's typology. They draw on indigenous art forms like the concert party framework, which is a theatrical tradition that incorporates play, song, and comedy. They apply folk songs, folk tales, traditional ethnic dances, and craft work to studies on HIV, malaria, mental illness, and other conditions. But within this cohort of studies that ground the culture, into concepts and methods, only one study ticked all the boxes of grounding the study in culture, paying attention to unintended consequences, and either identifying or investing in innovative and transformational methods. In this study, a collaborative project between Canadian and Ghanaian researchers, led by the Canadian ethnomusicologist Michael Frischkoff, a dance drama-based intervention for malaria and sanitation was co-developed with the community and professional artists in northern Ghana, 2 rural communities in northern Ghana, and performed by professional artists. Analysis of the first phase showed that while the intervention was accepted and competent, using professional artists was costly and unsustainable. The authors said it cost 5,000 Canadian dollars, for instance, to implement this project. It's one of the few studies in Ghana and Africa that actually talks about costing in a concrete way. The team piloted a follow-up study in which young people in the community, as well as school children, were trained to perform the repertoire. The social value attached to being a designated health communicator offered an innovative and potentially more sustainable approach for this project. This study showed that for the field, arts and health field to move into the innovative and transformational space, the space that contributes to community health development and health system strengthening in concrete ways, there had to be structural and financial support as well as community buy-in. Frischkoff and colleagues observed that community participation is crucial, not only to guide a project, but to ensure its long-term viability, because in supporting itself, the community acts out self-interest and naturally adapts to changing conditions. Next slide, please. This study, alongside others that include communities from project conception to scale, demonstrates the value of the arts and health model when it synthesizes the strengths of participatory research community knowledge and agency. For example, a Ugandan study that explored singing for improving lung health, conducted by Phillips and colleagues, a collaboration between British and Ugandan researchers. Participants suggested the incorporation of local songs for the intervention. The researchers had gone in with their set of songs that would be used for the intervention, but they brought in their own ideas about what would work. And the authors observed that in addition to what we conventionally consider healthcare resources, we should value and even utilize the personal, cultural, and societal resources that people can bring to their own healing. I'll end with some reflections on pushing this project forward and in ways that pay critical attention to the structural drivers of health and illness. Next slide, please. So one of the new mantras over the last 2 years is that we must use COVID-19 as a catalyst to reimagine and restructure weak and fragmented healthcare and social protection systems in ways that endure beyond the pandemic. This agenda, as many experts recognize, requires collaboration across society and government, what the United Nations calls the whole of government, whole of society approach. And I think much can be learned from indigenous healing systems and healing arts in this regard. One of the key markers of indigenous healing systems is their dynamic nature. Anthropological research in colonial and contemporary African settings have documented the ways in which traditional healers, herbalists, shrine priests, diviners invents tradition by reading society, social and health trends, and mimicking healthcare competitors in order to stay professionally relevant in ever-changing epidemiological landscapes. The Labadi and Gamashi case studies I discussed earlier offered insight into how this process operates and is sustained at a local level. The process of reinvention requires reimagining and restructuring the services for evolving health and social problems. And one can argue that the importance and relevance of traditional healers or indigenous healers in Ghana's pluralistic medical system, their ever-expanding wealth and influence beyond national borders, despite prolonged official attempts to delegitimize them from the colonial era to present, is testament to the power of their creative and innovative abilities. Society is also constantly changing and innovating as the epidemiological landscape changes. I mean, Ghana has experienced serial public health crises over the last century, from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which killed 100,000 people over 6 months, to HIV, AIDS, recurring infectious diseases like yellow fever and malaria, and a silent epidemic of chronic diseases like diabetes and cancers. Social responses to recurring and health threats in Ghana are shaped by a deep collective knowledge of sickness, debility, and death. Studies describe the ways in which individuals and groups make sense of complicated health conditions by drawing simultaneously from medical science, indigenous medicine, religion, politics, culture, and common sense, and how they work through complex social emotions, including fear, skepticism, anger, and hope. Communities also draw from social imaginaries and spiritual imaginaries. Has been struck by a particular condition, may start in an individual's mind, but take shape in group discourse and shared experience. But crucially, local terminologies and local practices around recurring and new health threats often emerge even before scientists get to grips with the competing harms of public health crises. We've seen this, in a variety of situations, from yellow fever terminologies to COVID-19 terminologies. Beyond the creative everyday responses to health crises, people also see through and work around the strategic inaction of people in power. This is what the subversive forms of folk art were there for. I mean, what the Fanti women, the Azawa singing groups sang and danced about when their warrior men went to war with British colonists. In these same communities, studies report tough negotiating skills of a post-colonial development project, whether these provide electricity or a new hospital or a new market to improve lives. The creative impulses in these communities coexist with radical social action. To conclude, I mean, arts-based interventions add value to public health interventions. All the reviews suggest this to be the case. But in Ghana and other African countries, where indigenous healing systems incorporate the art as a core feature, we have important conceptual and methodological frameworks for developing critical arts and health projects that tap into personal, cultural, societal resources that people bring to their own healing, as well as environments co-constructed by healers and agentic communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doctor. That was really fascinating. Our first respondent will be Kinna Likimani. Kinna, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Aikins. Fascinating. I'm so moved because in 2020, I reversed my diabetes. So I've been a reader my whole life, but while being a reader, I was sick. I had metabolic dysfunction. And in 2018, I was diagnosed with diabetes and put straight onto insulin. And while I controlled my blood sugar, I got worse. I got better and I got worse. And I put on more weight and I decided that I wanted to just get off insulin. Because the doctors were like, well, this is chronic and progressive. So in 2020, before COVID hit, I went to the University of UTU And I did some searches and came up across the work of a Chinese-Canadian nephrologist, Dr. Jason Fung, who was talking about, diabetes and these other, hypertension, disease of metabolic dysfunction that cannot be treated by medication, that there are lifestyle and there are ways to get off it. The short thing is I had to do intermittent fasting and low carb keto. So I started in February 2019, 2020. Within 3 weeks, I got off insulin. Within 3 months, I reversed my diabetes. And that is a miracle enough. But what really helped me and continues to help me sustain me on this journey has been art. I didn't even know that I was an artist, but I knew that I was I'm a carb addict. And then my whole life I'd been coping with carbohydrates. I didn't know how to manage myself emotionally or mentally. And in order to sustain my journey and maintain my health, I needed to find ways to self-soothe that was healthy and that didn't have me going for, bread. Ghanaian bread is so delicious. So really, I started looking at not just my reading, but I started, drawing. I got into something called Zentangle because I've never thought of myself as an artist, but this Zentangle thing, it helps, they deconstruct patterns and you just put a lot on paper. So anytime I would set aside time in the morning, and especially during the lockdown when I'm living with my teenage son who will eat every carb in sight, meanwhile I can't. Every time I felt, things were getting out of control in my head, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, I'll just sit down and take my it's just a plain piece of paper or something called a tile, and I'll take my fine liner and I will just do these repetitive patterns. I have become so good at it that, people say I should design Ghanaian cloth, and now I coach people to reverse and to improve their metabolic health. And it is not possible. Let me just say, it's not possible to do it without some form of art in one's life, whether you are listening to music, whether you are drawing like I do, whether you read, whether you meditate. Yoga is an art form. It's just not possible to, and a lot of these conditions, like you said, diabetes is the silent epidemic, or they are no longer silent. At the root of this is basically maintaining a lifestyle change. And it's not possible to still one's mind. I don't think it's possible for us to still our minds, sit with the very difficult emotions that basically we've never been trained to do so. It's not possible to do any of this without some kind of if not engagement, consistent engagement with an art form, whether you are doing it with yourself, or whether you are consuming some other art, whether you are doing it in a community of people, it's just not possible. So for you to do research around this, I just want to say I've been so moved. So that's my message, that it is not possible to improve one's metabolic health without art. It's just, it's not, and people shouldn't even try, because why would you even want to try? There's so many art forms that you can engage in. It just makes the journey so much more comforting and easier to get through, stuff like that. So I could go on and on, but I'll stop here. So I'm just here to say it's not possible. And thank you for your presentation. It's nice to have scientific backing for some of these things.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I respond to Kinna? I just wanted to say something real quick.
Real quick.
Real quick. No, thanks very much, Kinna. And I'd love to talk to you actually as part of my project, if that's okay. Sorry to pitch this in the webinar, but it's interesting you mentioned Zentangle, because there's a study actually in Tanzania that applies Zentangle to helping older adults living with mild cognitive impairment reconnect, to the emotions and their cognition. And it's shown signs of progress. Again, it's one of these sort of pilot studies that require some funding so we can scale up and see whether it works for other adults, older adults, but also for other conditions. So yeah, I mean, I think you've hit, you've actually sort of tapped into an art form that seems to have an impact for other conditions elsewhere. But thanks a lot, and I'd love to talk to you after this. Thanks.
We will. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we're just going to move on to Professor Kodjo Senah, who will give the second response, and then we will jump into a Q&A. Prof. Senah, please go ahead.
And actually, I'll just pause there just for 1 sec, and I'm going to start your slides in a moment, Dr. Senah. But following your response, we have a guest discussant with us, Christopher Bailey from the WHO, who's the Arts and Health Lead, and he'll be following Dr. Senah. And then we will come to all of your wonderful questions that I see are already flowing in the chat. So thank you you can continue to ask those questions and continue to make comments, and we're going to come back to those towards the end, and we'll have time there. All right. I'm going to start your slides now, Dr. Senah.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon from Ghana. It's wonderful to have all of you here. And Amma, it's wonderful to listen to your presentation. Indeed, your presentation has made my work lighter because you've touched on some issues which I have here. So may I crave your indulgence, panelists, if I repeat some of the things Amma has already discussed. In Ghana, we say, if you have too much meat, it doesn't spoil the soup. So much meat, it doesn't spoil the soup. Yeah, so thank you very much and good afternoon to everybody. As you can read from the screen, my title is The Arts and Healthcare in Ghana, or The Arts and Healing in Ghana, whichever way. It's about the same thing. Next slide, please. Yeah, so ill health is a fact of life. Ill health is, especially in its severe form, is a threat to human life. And so every human social system devises its own ways and means or modus vivendi, to deal with such threats. Anthropological studies across various cultures show clearly not only how human resilience, shows not only human resilience in the face of these threats, but also the way human beings create artifacts, they create myths, norms, values, and how they mobilize resources to deal with threats to ill health or to health. In my numerous sociological and anthropological studies in Ghana, indeed, I must confess it had never occurred to me to focus on the arts in healing, in spite of the fact that traditional healing involves a great deal of music, dancing, possession, or falling in trance, glossolalia, and other performative arts. Indeed, I must say here that my father was a traditional healer, and when he was alive, he was very hopeful that I'll pick up the job after he died. Unfortunately, I disappointed him, and he died about 4 years ago. Yeah, so not surprisingly, Una McLean is an anthropologist. She has observed that in many contexts, the mere mention of traditional medicine is apt to conjure up the image of, I quote, a medicine man clad in fur and feathers, prancing a spear and dancing around a fire to the inexorable rhythm of the tom-tom, unquote. This is Una McLean in her book, Magical Medicine. In other words, the mere mention of traditional medicine is up to conjure up all kinds of weird, quote and unquote, weird images of this kind of healing system. Next slide, please. Yeah, so, as already known, my presentation will focus on how works of art influence or constrain the utilization of indigenous healing services in Ghana. And of course, in order to promote this objective or in furtherance of this objective, and given the 15 minutes I have, my presentation will address two issues. One, what is the constituency of indigenous healing systems? Two, which works of art influence or constrain the utilization of indigenous healing systems and why? Next slide, please. Yeah, so in Ghana, indigenous healing systems are defined or identified according to the WHO's definition, which is all knowledge, I quote, all knowledge and practices used in diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of physical, mental, and social imbalance, which rely mainly on practical ancestral experiences and observation handed down verbally or in writing, emphasis mine. Clearly, this definition in its practical application faces pragmatic difficulties in view of the dramatic changes occurring in the area of traditional medicine. For instance, there are traditional healers, like my father, I saw my father did that, who in addition to prescribing herbal concoctions or decoctions, also prescribe synthetic medicines, especially the hematinics. Also, there are those who operate from herbal clinics managed along the lines of Western clinic and use Western diagnostic equipment such as weighing scale, sonoscope, stethoscope, blood pressure monitor, etc. The use of this equipment clearly departs from the domain of mainstream traditional medicine practice. However, it appears that the use of this equipment is to demonstrate not only their resilience, but also to attract more clients, especially the elite and Christians who are the severe critics of traditional healing systems. Next slide, please. Now, very quickly, let me turn to the constituency of traditional medicine by looking at the operators or the performance in this domain. Now, for the sake of this discussion, I identified the following. One, mediums, or also known as spokespersons of gods and goddesses. They speak for the gods or goddesses. Two, herbalists and diviners, including the Islamic healers. These are people who deal purely with herbs. They prescribe herbs. You come with your health condition. They look at you, and based on their training, they go to the forest and get the appropriate herbal medication for you. We also have those I call itinerant herbalists. These are men and women who move from village to village selling herbal products. And then we have birth attendants. Others call them traditional birth attendants or TBAs. These are men and women who have specialized or who assist women in birthing. Traditional birth attendants or birth attendants. Then we have circumcisers, bone setters who are more or less orthopedic surgeons, if I may put it that way. Circumcisers are men who have acquired the skill in circumcising children, male and female. Of course, in Ghana, female circumcision is against the law. And female circumcision takes place especially in the northern regions of this country and in the south or in the cities in areas where people of northern extraction reside. Then we have stargazers and palm readers. These are, yes, stargazers, as the name implies. They ask of when you were born, and then they classify you under a particular star, and they tell you what will become of you in the future. Palm readers, of course, as the name implies, are people who can read the lines in palms and tell who will be rich, who will be poor, who will die when, and etc. Palm readers. And then finally, we have the late arrivals. These are Christian, charismatic, and Pentecostal pastors who have been active in this country since the 1980s. Yes, they have been very, very, very active in this country since the 1980s. And they are all over the place. Indeed, there's no community in this country where you cannot find a small church operated by a pastor or a charismatic pastor or Pentecostal pastor. Now, these categories that I have identified have emerged in response to the perceived etiologies of diseases and conditions, the perceived causes of diseases and their conditions. And of course, they are known by their specializations. The specializations are known only to their clients, and they make extensive use of artworks, and of late they use ICT technology a lot to publicize their healing activities. Next slide. Now, artworks in Ghana are produced by specialist artists, ordinary people, as Anna has indicated in her presentation, people who have developed the flair for graphic printing or painting. Their subjects of artwork vary extensively. These range from culture, religion, politics, sports, to scenes of daily existential importance. You can find them along busy streets in the city, and their works are displayed and sold to any interested person. Interestingly, such artists hardly engage in mural public works as found in various graffiti works in Europe and America. Samples of their canvas artworks are shown below. Next slide. Yeah, so George Floyd, here we can see George Floyd. George Floyd died 2 years ago, but his ghost still haunts artists in this country. So that's George Floyd on the left, and then Kwame Nkrumah, our first president, our first head of state, on the right. Next slide. And then, of course, we have COVID-19, and then we have Jamestown boxing. Jamestown in Ghana is very famous for producing boxers, and they produce world-class boxers like Azuma Nelson, in the featherweight division, like Laura Ankra and the rest. Jamestown is a fishing community, and it has a famous lighthouse. The colonial administration built a lighthouse there that is jutting way behind it. So, of course, these subjects provide topics for artists. Next slide. So at this juncture, it may be asked, how is this genre of artwork employed in the medical domain in Ghana? A cursory observation shows that this work is employed more by traditional healers than by allopathic practitioners. In a context like Ghana, where there is virtually no censorship on what is publicly displayed, and where visual impressions are more impactful than abstract ideas, traditional healers make greater use of quote-unquote freelance artists than any other group of healers. So let me show you just a few, and let me say that your viewing discretion is advised, since some of the works may not be pleasing to your eyes. So this is mural work. Those of you who know Ghana, Accra very well. 14 hours. Yes. who know Accra very well, this is along the route to Kwame Nkrumah Circle, very close to a very famous hotel, Paloma Hotel. And the images you see over there, relate to various conditions, various health problems experienced by the people: eye problems, waist problems, nasal problems, stomach problems, hernia, gonorrhea, hemorrhoids, cancer of the chest, pregnancy, and then of course, fertility problems. Yeah, so these topics feature extensively in many of the artworks that I have collected, but time will not permit me to show all of them here. Next slide. Yeah, so this Messiah Herbal Center. Messiah Herbal Center, and you can see it is shown somebody with mumps, eye problems, waist problems, nasal problems, ear problems, erectile dysfunction, breast cancer, and then hemorrhoids. So you can read what the operator can deal with below the images: piles, breast cancer, sores, boils, fever, headaches, sores, backbone aches, bleeding nose, ear, eye, etc. And they give you their location, and then they give you their phone number so you can contact them. They no longer operate in obscurity. For a long time now, they've come out to the public domain and are exhibiting their artwork or their healing potentials through such notices. Next slide. Yeah, this is another one, Asumdwe Herbal Mixture. Peace, Asumdwe, Peace Herbal Mixture, and their phone numbers. And then you can see the phallic display and the health problems that they can teach. Below, we have people who are, again, the image there has to do with people who have weak sexual performance. Yes. So we have somebody in blue. That person must show alopecia, premature alopecia, balding, and then waist problems for the aged, and all kinds of other problems. Next slide. Yeah, I like this picture, this artwork very much, and especially the image on the left. So what the image is saying is that if you are a woman and your womb, which is represented by a pot, your womb has been taken away by a witch or wizard, by God's power, it can be replaced. So that is what this image is about. And of course, the other images show various health conditions such as elephantiasis, gonorrhea, hemorrhoids, waist problems, etc. Next slide. Yeah, so this is another artwork. Fair to fair, Nana Mutiaba. Nana Mutiaba. Mutia in tree is dwarf. Dwarf. So people believe that there are people who suffer from sicknesses relating to dwarfs. So here it's written all kinds of health, both spiritual and physical, can be dealt with in this facility. And they indicate their location: Malam, Sakaman Junction, and of course their phone numbers. They're all over the place. Next slide. Yes, so this one summarizes everything. Dr. Mumuni, we cure all kinds of sicknesses. And of course, that's a doctor holding a horse tail in his attire. and the patient sitting on the mat waiting to be attended to. Next slide. Yes, Nana Kweku Bonsan, this gentleman is very famous in Ghana. Perhaps of all the traditional healers, he is the most known. And very often, he throws a challenge to pastors, he throws them challenge. And he's very well known. He's well traveled. The last time I heard of him, a few weeks ago, I was told he had traveled to Rome. I don't know whether he was going to meet the Pope, but he's well traveled and he's very well known in Ghana. Nana Kweku Bonsan. Next slide. Yes, so here we have powerful Malam from Benin. And in Ghana, the belief is that if a healer comes from afar, then he has more powers to deal with all kinds of health problems. So indeed, this signpost or this post simply summarizes the saying that in distant lands lies faith. In distant lands lies faith. So powerful Malam from Benin. For all your problems, contact the Malam on the following numbers. And I think he's a specialist in Mami water spirit. Spirit derived from mermaids, Mami water. Yes. Next slide, please. Yes, so these are all over Accra, especially busy streets, along busy streets. You can see these billboards, well designed using ICT technology of pastors and yes, pastors, charismatic pastors or Pentecostal pastors displaying what they can do. Here, it's Operation 10,000 Babies. 10,000 babies and anointing service. Yes, all over the place, there are interesting billboards such as this. Next slide. Yes. So here, many of the healers or many of the new healers, young new healers, operate from herbal clinics. And as I described earlier, herbal clinics are managed like any Western clinic, except that here, the prescription is herbal medication. So this herbal clinic was opened recently and I was invited to the ceremony. Next slide. Yes. This is another herbal clinic showing all the things, all the conditions that can be handled in this clinic. One of the interesting features of this clinic is that their spellings are always faulty. Yes, so never mind the spelling. But what I like about this signboard is the extreme right and below. There is a statement there saying, I have a living hope through Christ. I have a living hope through Christ. And this statement is very important because under colonial rule, these healers were all described as demonic. They were not Christians, they were not Muslims, they were just demonic practitioners. In fact, one medical historical record described traditional healers as, I quote, insincere juju men living on the neurosis of their illiterate folk, unquote. So here, this gentleman or this person is showing that he deals with herbal products or with all kinds of diseases, and he prescribes herbal medicines, but he's a Christian. I have a living hope through Christ. Next slide. Yes. So over the years, in fact, before COVID, anytime the New York NYU students come to Accra, as part of our teachings, I take them on field trip. And here I went with a group of 5 to one famous herbal hospital in Accra to show them, a herbal hospital. So here, the students, NYU students are there. Yes, next slide. So, in conclusion, I'm saying that where literacy is fairly low, where literacy is fairly low, as argued by Amma, the arts should not be seen as an added feature to health communication and health behavior, but rather as the core feature, because they tap into imagination, the memory, the emotion, the thinking and embodiment, and sociality. In the Ghanaian context, where literacy is fairly low, and where visual expressions register greater impact than non-visual ideas, artworks are appreciated, especially when people identify with the messages they carry. And the traditional healing industry in Ghana, traditional healers make greater use of this technique than any other group of healers. I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Senah. Thank you, Amma, for your keynote, and to our two respondents. And it is my pleasure now to turn the mic to Christopher Bailey, who is the Arts and Health Lead for the World Health Organization. Welcome, Christopher. Thank you for being with us for this presentation. We're very interested to hear your thoughts on what you've been hearing.
Oh, thanks, Nisha. No, it's a pleasure. And may I just ask one quick question before I start? How much time would you like to give me so I can make sure I pace myself properly?
We have between 8 to 10 minutes, so please go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. So first of all, let me say how great it is to be virtually back in Ghana. I was in Accra, sadly, during the West African Ebola epidemic. Accra was the UNMIR staging area for the other West African countries, and I was eventually stationed in Liberia for a while, working with a body retrieval team in the Monserrato slum in Liberia. And one of the things in that tragic experience that I remember quite distinctly was in this atmosphere of palpable fear and confusion and anger and dread over this terrible thing that was happening, how street artists played a critical role in breaking through the stigma of people who are affected by the disease, by helping people understand that the interventions that were happening in terms of hand hygiene, in terms of safe body retrieval and safe burial, were all for the public good. And in a way that the simple describing of the scientific evidence could not do. So in a sense, when you're in that adrenaline-infused state of fear and anxiety, one of the ways you can break out of that loop is through authentic humor. So clowns, street clowns played a tremendous role. Music and dance to calm the cortisol levels, to calm the adrenaline surges, to get people to break out of their mental cycles and to start seeing things in a different way with a new perspective, to encourage through street theater empathy with those who have fallen ill, with those who are trying to bring help. Because one of the things that I experienced was the threat posed to the healthcare workers and to the people who were trying to bring help, and the natural human reaction of fearing those helping, thinking that they're the ones bringing the disease. And this is not unique to Africa. We saw this in the COVID pandemic all over the world, quite frankly, in every culture. It's a human reaction. And yet the arts, as much as science and evidence, was able to break through a lot of those negative patterns and save many people's lives. And it was quite inspiring to see that happen firsthand in West Africa during that epidemic. Now, the argument at WHO that arts have a healing ability is something that took some getting used to in our own culture. Dr. Aikins probably knows a colleague that we've worked with at UCL, Daisy Fancourt, who wrote a WHO report, was the lead author on the evidence base for the health benefits of the arts, a wide scoping survey. And I'm sure she's quite familiar with it. But even so, getting people to start thinking in terms of the arts and health as not a dichotomy, but something interrelated, took some getting used to. I remember an early conversation with colleagues at WHO where they dismissed what we were looking into as, well, the arts are just simply recreational. And I said, well, wait a minute, listen to that word, recreation. That's healing. And a number of the discussants in this conversation have pointed to the WHO definition of health, which I think is really, really important, because once we go back to that definition, then it becomes a little bit more intuitive why the arts can play such a role in healing. As mentioned, our 1948 Constitution specifically states that health is not merely the absence of disease and infirmity, but the acquiring of the highest level of physical, mental, and social well-being. And once we put it into that context, I think people begin to understand why the arts can play such a crucial role in the healing process. The arts can bring comfort. That comfort can quantifiably lower cortisol levels, lower adrenaline levels, put us into a more rational state where we can have better judgment on what we are doing, and relieve our bodily systems to move into a more healing mode. The arts can also, through empathy, through that triangulation of putting yourself into someone else's shoes, begin to help us make sense of a chaotic, difficult, and sometimes fearful situation. And ultimately, the arts can, through that active imagination, begin to imagine positive ways forward when all seems the difficulty of a misfortune make it very hard to imagine how we can move forward. And the arts can help us do that. And I think, frankly, the notion of traditional versus modern is not so much an evolutionary model of primitive versus advanced. What it really is the traditional, what we call the traditional approach, is a holistic approach which was primary and fundamental. And over time, as societies became more fractured, more distanced from nature, more distanced from social connection, we began to lose our knowledge of these traditional practices that had a positive power. If we go back 70,000 years to the midpoint of the life of our very brief lifespan of our species, 70,000 years ago, something happened called the cognitive revolution, where in our midbrain, we reformed our neural pathways to develop the ability to imagine things that didn't exist in nature. It was the creative spark, and that was marked in things like cave paintings where you have bodies with an animal's head, something that doesn't exist in nature. But at that moment, 70,000 years ago, we have the first evidence that we could imagine things that don't exist or don't exist yet. And that, frankly, was the beginning of not only the arts, but it was the beginning of science, because science cannot exist without the hypothesis, without that magic what if. What if this could happen? And the difference is in the arts, we have an unbridled emotional connection with that creativity. And in science, we have a evidence-based discipline in order to see if there's something there, to see if it actually maps to physical laws and what we can observe about nature and ourselves. But the root is the same. The other thing that happened 70,000 years ago is the first evidence in the fossil record of a healed femur. And if you think about that for a moment, prior to that moment, there was no example in the animal kingdom or in humanity of a broken leg and that person surviving. Because once you were that grievously wounded, you became a threat to the herd or the tribe or the clan, and you were left to die. So what happened? What actually made that clan 70,000 years ago stop what it was doing, put the tribe at risk, and care for the vulnerable at the risk of the whole? And why did it happen at the same time as the first imaginative art? Well, I would argue that they're very much related, that in order to make that leap and say it is worth the sacrifice of the whole for the individual vulnerable among us to survive, we had to imagine that person's worth. We had to project that hope that that person even could survive, that indeed hope is actually a creative act. And that, I think, forms the essential commonality between arts and the medical sciences. That the other aspect which that example illustrates is this common notion of compassion. And that English word compassion actually comes from a Latin root, compassio, which means struggle together. And it's very similar to the South African concept of Ubuntu, this idea that your success is my success, your failure is my failure, that our common goal is what matters. And this notion of a greater social good is something that has gotten lost in our commodified modern world, and something that is still preserved in many traditional cultures. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had a town hall with the Navajo Nation in North America. And it was really interesting to hear their story of what services, what health services and psychosocial support they had on the Navajo Nation. And I asked a naive question. I asked, do you have psychologists? And they kind of laughed and they said, well, no, we don't. But that Western notion of psychology doesn't speak to us. And I said, well, what does speak to you? And they said, well, talk therapy and digging down into some form of hurt in our personal lives that then affects our adult behavior doesn't make a lot of sense to us. We define ourselves by who we are in the community. And so the solution has to therefore be a community solution. And I said, well, give me an example. And this one artist on the call said, well, she told the story of her mother, who was the victim of a sexual assault. And with her mother's permission, in the alleyway where her mother was assaulted, and it was a very crime-ridden neighborhood, she painted this 2-story mural of her mother looking proud. And when that painting went up, not only did it help her mother regain her sense of self and identity and take back control over her own emotions and her feelings of dissociation from her own body, but the crime rates in the neighborhood dropped to almost nothing. So it had this ripple effect. And in another example, in New Delhi, in India, there was a group of women from a lower caste who, and the goal of this theater-based project was to teach these women about access to healthcare services in their neighborhood. And the idea was to have the women themselves write the script. So the workers came in, the women were there, and paper and pencils were handed out, and the first order of business was for them to begin to write down their thoughts about health, why they needed better healthcare services. And one woman took the piece of paper and held it up like this and said, "What am I to do with this?" And they said, "Well, you're supposed to write your thoughts on it." And she said, "Well, why would I waste a perfectly good piece of paper when it could be wrapping fish?" She was a fishmonger and couldn't understand why you would waste paper by writing on it. Another woman was clutching her pencil and began to cry. And they asked her, "What's wrong? What's the matter?" And she said that she hasn't written anything since she was 12 years old and put into an arranged marriage with an older man who forbade her from ever writing again. And so already before anything was written, these stories began to come out. And to me, all these echoes around the world of similar stories of how arts can unlock healing. Go back to one of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, who said, "Loneliness is not the absence of people. Loneliness is the inability to express what matters to you most." And sometimes that expression is through words. Sometimes words cannot express what matters to us most, and it becomes a sound, it becomes a gesture, a movement, a rhythm. But whatever that is, the artist is there to help people find it. And if they can't do it themselves, then to act as intermediary so that we can better connect to ourselves, to each other, and to the environment around us. And the last thing that I'll say, because I don't want to go on too long, is I myself am blind. I suffer from terminal glaucoma. And I use it as an example of the difference between curing something and healing something. No amount of music or painting or dance or story is going to regenerate my shattered optic nerve. And yet, music, theater, the arts, storytelling has literally helped me, not just psychologically, but physically, by aiding the neuroplasticity of my brain, rerouting the neural pathways from my visual cortex, from my shattered optic nerve to my auditory senses, and helped me begin to learn the art of echolocation, to be able to sense the physical space around me through sound. And more than that, once having achieved that, allowing me to create a story that gives me a new sense of identity, a new sense of purpose in the world. So I no longer simply feel loss. I feel a sense of what I've gained. Just as you willingly close your eyes to better savor a glass of wine, just as you willingly close your eyes to better embody a piece of music, just as you willingly close your eyes to trace the gentle slope of a lover's forearm, so too do I embrace the closing of my eyes to better share this moment with you. That, to me, is the healing power of art. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a wonderful bunch of presentations. There's several things in the comments. I think we, so many of us resonate to all the stuff that we've heard. I just want to, with the time that we have, just maybe throw in a few. I think this first question here is about how does one share the business landscape of art interventions and public health in Ghana or even around the world? For example, startups, for-profit organizations at the intersection of art and health. How do they develop such business models while keeping art accessible? And what are the target audiences? I think this is a question that may have been for Amma, but I think any of us can attempt to do this because it's an, I see Kinna nodding. So anyone, please take this. You'd have to unmute.
If I may attempt to answer that, I mean, I think in Ghana, we have to think about arts in two ways. I mean, there is the arts that's produced by sort of either formally trained artists or street artists, you know, the kind of art that you see in hotels and in galleries, you know, that, you know, tourists sort of buy or appear in, you know, art shows around the world and so on. That form of art is produced through a business model. It makes a lot of money, not as much as is made in Nigeria, for instance, but at least it's enough, right, to build careers. The kind of art that, you know, I was talking about, and I guess, you know, even Prof. Senah was talking about, would be the kind of grassroots, community-oriented, you know, built from below, part and parcel of many communities across the country. I mean, for example, the signposts and the billboards that Prof. Senah showed us are typically sort of produced by sign artists. Some are trained, some are not trained. They might not necessarily get a lot of money from what they do, but it's a business. I think that the business model for the former category is more aligned with other kinds of industries in Ghana, right? I mean, there's sort of government buy-in in some sense. The arts that are applied to healing and to healthcare don't really get much attention from policymakers, from the government. So I think there are two forms of arts, but I mean, I haven't really sort of delved into what it means in terms of, you know, making that form of art a business. The healthcare, well, the indigenous healing industry, as Prof. Senah described it, is a very wealthy industry in its own right anyway. So perhaps artists who work in that domain can make money, right? But we haven't really done any proper research to understand how the synergies between indigenous healers, herbalists, you know, can actually make business careers and financial success for artists who work in that domain. So those would be my preliminary thoughts, yeah.
Fantastic. Just to follow up on that, you did mention the $5,000 dance drama for malaria. And in a practical sense, do you envision, and somebody did put this question in the chat, reimagine, you talked about our health systems. Is there an affordable way to send these messages through art, as opposed to spending $5,000 for dance, which we could, you know, which I guess that study shows that there are benefits for the malaria?
You know, every health intervention costs money. When I've been based at University of Ghana and I'm working in Jamestown, which is really, you know, just a few miles down from the university campus, sending a team of, you know, 10 graduate students into Jamestown to gather data requires money. They've got to get in a car, right? They've got to eat. We've got to recompense people we talk to and so on. So even a small project will cost money. So costing is really, really important. But I want to use an example. I mean, I think that the question was about, are there any sorts of instances where we've reimagined and restructured our health systems? I mean, in Ghana, there's this project called the CHIPS program. It's called the Community Health and Planning Systems project. It started as a pilot project in Navrongo in northern Ghana. And it was really a very simple project. Let's, you know, shift sort of primary care to the basic community level. Let's create small enclaves and compounds where people can come in and get just primary sorts of, you know, testing done, you know. And it started really with maternal health and child health. Started small, you know, a research project was published somehow, and I think it's really through the political nous of the researchers, the lead researchers and so on, grabbed sort of the attention of Ghana Health Service and Ministry of Health. This started in 1998. Over the last 20 years, it's moved from Navrongo to being sort of a national sort of project across the country. And I know that, there are new forms of CHIPS programs being researched all the time. How do we layer on diabetes, hypertension measurements onto maternal health services? It takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, but it also takes sort of political will. And I think if I am to mention a project that has tried to reimagine and restructure health systems, that would be it. And I think that if we're going to develop arts-based interventions that, for example, can last beyond the pilot phase, exploratory phase. For instance, the study by Frischkopf and colleagues that focused on dance drama with malaria, also in northern Ghana, we might want to learn how the CHIPS program started from inception and moved to the sort of national level project, which actually is cited around the world as a best practice model. So I think every intervention requires funding. And obviously that means, if you're a researcher, are you based in a university that sees the value of arts-based interventions and is going to put money to the intention? Are you living in a country where the government actually thinks, oh, okay, we think arts-based interventions are important to public health, and so we're going to put a chunk of money into that? Do you have access to global health funders who want to support arts-based health interventions? So these are questions that one must ask, as I think as a prerequisite for developing the field in Ghana and elsewhere.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. One of the things that I think, you said this, that got a lot of people's attention and their ears perked up was that you said, it is not possible to improve one's metabolic health without art. Mm-hmm. And we live in a country where for most people, for the most part, they have to take their own healthcare into their own hands without being told what to do. So for the person who's dealing with all kinds of stuff, who hadn't thought about how is art going to help me in my everyday world, how does that work practically?
I think that in line with the response that Amma made, we need to really decolonize health and well-being. Because if we do so, then we get back to an understanding that we've always had as Ghanaians, as Africans, really as people everywhere, by the way, have had cultures where they understood and accepted arts as an integral part of healing. The art forms, it's everywhere. I think about my, the wakekeeping for my grandmother in the village, and there were, brass band people, there were brass band, because she was very old. She died almost at 100, and the village said, well, it's like a festival. And literally, there wasn't a single step we took that wasn't accompanied by different drummers and different types of singing, all that. We need, because once we get into the so-called formal spaces of arts, of health, then it's a very clinical kind of dry, this attitude where everything is like, it has to be prescriptive. They just have to give you pills. And I came from a situation where the doctors were looking at my blood sugar and saying, you're doing so well. And yet I knew that I felt really ill. And this idea where well-being is greater than health. Am I saying that? Yeah, I think that's what I think. The well-being has things like getting good sleep, like managing your mental health, like managing your emotions, like managing your stress and looking at your energy levels. And all of that is tied in really the way modern medicine wants to take the individual and their healthcare. And we need to sort of, I call it decolonizing, because I'm as a Ghanaian, I'm colonized still, but there has to be some term, even for places where they weren't colonized, that we really need to disengage from what I call it the metabolic dysfunction industrial complex, the shop that the pharmacy, the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare, the food, they've set up shop. in our metabolic health and are just reaping money. And we need to, everybody needs to disengage from that. But in terms of how you get your art on and your healing, it shouldn't be a difficult thing. Again, it's organic. It's about your life. So you find what it is that you are interested in, things that give you joy, but also understand that if you are formally educated, that there are things that you may not have heard about, like I hadn't heard of Zentangle. The internet is a great resource for finding additional things in additional art forms. Journaling, whether you do it on paper or you do it in audio form. I have people I coach who do journaling in audio forms. Yoga, yoga, taking a walk and listening to music. It's not difficult to find. Just sit down. Ghanaians are, I'm not very religious, but Ghanaians are very religious. So I tell people the Methodist hymn book. The Methodist hymn book, sit down and, sing to yourself, enjoy, because we are also not on health journeys not to enjoy our lives. And you can't enjoy your life without art. I don't know. People try and construct a life without art. I don't know. But like for the men, you like football, watch all the football, because sports is an art form. So it's not a difficult thing. It's just that your doctor is going to tell you to reduce your stress, and they are not going to have any strategies for you. It sounds very foreign. They'll tell you, you suffer from stress. What adult doesn't suffer from stress? And then they'll say, reduce your stress without giving you any strategies. The strategies are what you enjoy to do. I like playing my son's PS4 games. I get stressed. I'll play a PS4 game. So there are lots of things that you can do. It's not difficult. Just find a way, just lean into the things that you enjoy doing, and know that if you have access to the internet, you can find other things to do and indulge in as an art form. But it's a factor. I don't need studies to tell me this. You're not going to improve your health and your well-being without the arts. It's impossible. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Christopher just told us that hope is a creative art. So that is wonderful. You talked about, go ahead.
Not only hope, but learning to give yourself grace. Even retooling. I've had to retool how I think about things so that I don't stress myself and lead myself to a bowl of rice. Because literally, if my mental health suffers, I'll be going back to those things. So even learning how to give yourself grace, how to do forgiveness, a lot of these comes through indulging and engaging with art. So art is just huge. It's just a lifesaver. That's all I have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There's a question from one of our listeners who says Western medicine promotes diet and exercise as preventative measures. And you just mentioned yoga. But she asked, it's Susan, are there any studies about arts as preventative measures of any health conditions? Anyone can take this, I guess.
I think there's a lot of...
Are there any studies? Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of evidence, and it goes even beyond that. It also goes to accelerating recovery from hospitalization, for instance. And in the study that I referred to that Daisy Fancourt put out, that's I think Nisha put in the chat, there's one particular study mentioned in that report of what happens with physical therapy in a hospital setting in recovery from an operation or a physical injury. And what they found was that the same number of physical movements and actions that the therapist was working with the patient on, when done to music, could reduce the hospital stay by 50%. It had that dramatic an effect, that adding music to the rote repetition of these physical movements created a deeper connection with the body. It made it fun. It gave a sense of hope and optimism, and not just boredom or feeling like you're climbing up this painful hill. And it completely changed the context of that healing activity. And to just to connect that to what the previous speaker just said as well, medicine is not just about eliminating a symptom or even prolonging life in all cases. It's about finding joy. It's about thriving. It's about living that life. And you know, I hesitate to say the arts are essential to it, but I hesitate because people kind of put arts on this pedestal, but we're all artists. You know, we all create in every aspect of our life. Every time we arrange flowers at the table, every time we enjoy the movement of our body down the street, every time we come up with a phrase that makes someone laugh, that's a moment of creativity. That's a moment of artistry. You know, so for me, it's not about looking for miracle cures, whether that's within the pharmaceutical industry or even herbalists. It's about curating our lives. And that's what the arts can help us do.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Senah, I wondered if you had any last words to offer before we begin to close up.
Well, what an honor to give the last words. Yeah, it's if we understand health as a holistic thing, not just falling ill, going to hospital and being given medicines, but also living well, you know, living happily. You know, recently I was very fascinated when I was told that one country, is it Sweden or Finland or something, you know, was the Finnish were the most happiest people. I said, oh my God, how did they come by that? They mustn't have health problems at all. Well, yeah, so, you know, my last word is that we have to see health in this holistic manner. The physical, the mental, the social, all working in sync, working together. So if you have a problem with your tummy and you go to a doctor and the doctor prescribes some medication, yeah, that is about half the problem solved. How about the other issues that led to this situation? You know, allopathic medicine does not address that. And that's why traditional healers operate holistically. We're looking at you, your problem. We're also looking at your behavior within the community, whether you've broken societal taboos. You know, recently there was this gentleman in my area who had problems with his, you know, his scrotum. And when I asked people around, what is wrong with this person? So don't you know this person? He's always running around with people's wives. That's why he has that. Yes. Yes. So his condition is not hernia. It is special hernia, or hernia, if I should put it that way, spiritualized hernia. You know, so he's paying for his misbehavior within the community. You know, so I think the world will be very great, will be very interesting, or medical practice will be very interesting if we allow this holistic approach. And indeed, that's what I teach the medical students at college. It's very important. It's not just a matter of an atomized patient or a patient sitting in front of you, atomized, taken out of its sociocultural context, prescribing medicines, and that's it. So if you watch very carefully in traditional medicine, anytime somebody, a sick person is taken to the healer, and that person has to go on admission, oftentimes a family member must follow him, must go with him or her. Yes. And that person must also share in the restrictions and the taboos given, prescribed for that sick person in his admission, in his facility. So it's a shared responsibility. So much for what I say.
Thank you so much. I also just want to bring everybody's attention to a little bit further up in the chat. There is a link to a review of evidence of health benefits of the arts from the World Health Organization. So that would be something that could be helpful to all of us who are not in the chat. If you could go in there and click on it before the webinar is over. And why don't we go to Misha, and then you can wrap up.
Right. Thank you so much, Frankie, and thank you to everyone here for such an inspiring conversation. And I can see, we've taken a little more time because we've had a lot to think about and talk about together. I have no doubt we could continue. Connie had a question here about which others may also be interested in with regards to, are there labs and organizations on arts and health that one can volunteer with, or resources that would help one go deeper? Certainly that initial scoping review is available. And if, one of the roles that we have at Arts and Health at NYU is to collaborate with the WHO on collaborating centers in this area. So there are many arts and health labs that already exist. They may not refer to themselves immediately in that way. Some of them do. Some of them refer to themselves a little bit differently, but they're interested in advancing research, practice, policy in the area of the arts and health. And so I would encourage you, Connie, and others who are interested to, as Kinna said, just get online and do a search on arts and health, and you will find many institutions, organizations that are university-based and that are also based in the community. And as we evolve this initiative in collaboration with the WHO, we will have more and more listings of that as well. Chris, is there anything else you'd like to add to that point? Or
no, I think you captured it quite nicely. Just I think the beauty of this work is that everyone's welcome.
Absolutely. We are all artists, and I'm just going to put in the chat here a couple of links for you should you wish to revisit this fantastic conversation. We're going to edit it and have it available through the Arts and Health at NYU site and YouTube channel. And you can also follow the Arts and Health at NYU in a number of ways that I've put in the chat. Thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye-bye to everybody. You're welcome to Accra, Ghana.